This is going back towards the Great Depression time period. And the problems that America faced in the 1930s affected what was going on in Germany, who already had problems after World War I. Things got so bad there that they turned to the Nazis and Hitler, and obviously World War II happens. Not unlike in the 1990s when the Soviet Union fell apart, Russia fell on hard times, and Vladimir Putin rose to power, promising that he would fix everything. So what we got to figure out today is what the heck went wrong, right? This is not a U.S. history class, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on what happened in America during the Great Depression. We'll touch on it a little bit and how we tried to address it, which you all learned about in 8th grade a little bit, and you're going to do it again in 11th grade. But we're also going to focus more on how the interconnectivity of the economy worked and how bad things in one place affected another. We're going to figure out what led to some places doing well and then maybe not so well a little bit later. So the first question here says, what factors contribute to economic recovery in Britain and France? Okay, so remember, Britain and France pummeled during World War I, but something had to have happened to make those countries rebuilt. So what helped the British and the French rebuild? Okay, right, so industries returned to peacetime production and people found jobs. And what I mean by peacetime production is like all the factories in the world, like maybe they were producing cars and then the war happens and they go to making tanks. Well, you don't need tanks when the war is over. And it takes some time for factories to reconvert themselves into making things that regular people want. Once that occurs, people could find jobs in factories back home again. Absolutely. And that becomes a really big deal in World War II. Like Ford and Chevy and all of the American car companies stopped making cars and started making planes and tanks for World War II. And I'll show you some cool stuff about that. It's interesting. Okay, right, the British and the French got reparations payments, right? The Germans were paying them. That was part of the deal with the Treaty of Versailles. Stunk for the Germans, great for the British and the French. Okay, yeah, they gained German territory. Remember, with the Treaty of Versailles, the Germans lost their overseas colonies. So anything owned by the Germans in, like, let's say Asia or Africa went to the British and the French. Same thing with the Ottoman Empire. When the Ottoman Empire fell apart after World War I, the British and the French get those territories as well. All right, and these, right, accumulation of natural resources helped to fuel the growth of British and French factories again. Excellent, very good, guys. That'll do for that one. All right, so instead of making you read every little piece of this, we'll talk our way through some of this stuff because I think we can just kind of figure it out using our ability to have logic here. So let's say during World War I, if you were a farmer in the United States during World War I, you were making a killing. Does anyone want to infer or rather hypothesize a reason why American farmers during the war made boatloads of cash? Food for the military, okay? Whether it's to fund or whether to supply American troops or British and French troops with American food. Because think about it, in a war zone, right, all those fields are now dug up for trenches, right? They're barren wastelands. Those lands are going to take a long time to kind of recultivate. So food production in Britain and France declines. And those soldiers are going to become more dependent on American farmers. So they start expanding their lands available to them in the United States, grow more and more food. Makes sense, right? Because you're making a killing. You might as well try to supply as much as you can. But then the war comes to an end. Now what happens to those American farmers? Well, that's the thing, right? They expanded their fields, right, to produce more. But now the war comes to an end. Do the people in Britain and France need as much American food anymore? No. But you have a situation in which farmers started growing a whole bunch more during World War I and have all the stuff planted in the ground. But now the war's over. So what happens to the prices for American food after World War I? Because the surplus. You have all this food sitting around and no one's buying it anymore. And typically when there's a lot of stuff available and the demand for it is low, prices plummet. So that's going to be our answer for number one. Okay, we're going to say, due to producing a surplus of food that there was no longer a demand for, farmers lost much of their money. Right? They weren't making much money anymore. It's not the greatest sentence, I apologize for that. Okay, but that's basically the idea here. When you produce too much, that sounds great, right? Free, like so much food. But if you are the person producing the food and you have the low prices for that food, you're not making much money anymore. Maybe you have to lay off a worker. Maybe you can't afford to purchase a tractor. And that leads into number 3 here. It says overproduction. What do you think overproduction means? If number 2 is kind of like an example of that. make more than you need, right? We need a certain amount of it. People want a certain amount of it. If you produce more than that, that's overproduction. When you produce more than what is needed or wanted. Okay? If you make more than what is needed or wanted, right? The fancy word for want in economics is called demand. If you produce more than what people demand, prices plummet, right? If it's clothing, what happens, right? It ends up at Marshall's, where I go and buy it, right? At a really low price, right? If you're a producer making clothing, you don't want your clothes to end up at Marshall's because it's selling for probably below what it cost you to make it or close to the cost of what it cost you to make it. You don't want that, right? You want people having a demand for your things. You don't want them to end up in a clearance bin, right? So food is just sitting around in America, wasting away. Farmers are losing money. It's not a good situation. Same thing with industries. Right? You guys remember, hopefully, when you were in 8th grade, like the time period in the 1920s for America had a special name, right? When we had, flappers doing their flapping thing, and you had good times. What was the name of the 20s? It was very loud. It was very tigerish, lionish. I don't know. I don't know my animals. I have to go back to kindergarten for a third time sometime. The Roaring 20s, right? Sounds great, and it was in a lot of ways. But the thing is, once you get towards the end of the 1920s, you have a situation, let's say, the 1920s, right? We're a time period where people started to buy things like household appliances, right? So imagine you are, Maytag. That company's been around a long time. You've probably seen that word on a washing machine somewhere, right? So Maytag is cranking out washing machines. You just sold a washing machine to every household in America, let's say. But now you've done that. People don't upgrade their washing machines yearly, like you do with your cell phone, so you can take your forehead selfies on Snapchat, right? It's like, I buy a washing machine, I want to hold on to that thing for like a decade if I can, right? So you're Maytag, you're cranking out these things in your factories, right? Because Industrial Revolution, but now they're just sitting in a warehouse because no one needs these washing machines anymore. What's going to happen to the price of those washing machines? They're going to go down, okay? So now the prices are low. Maybe you're selling them below cost. What's going to happen to the Maytag business if that's the case? They're going to suffer, right? Maybe not going out of business, but maybe at the very least you start laying off workers, right? So as more and more people get laid off, that unemployment rate grows and grows and grows, and no one's buying things because they don't have any money, and that just spirals out of control. So an effective overproduction is you're going to have low prices for products, which sounds great, but there is such a thing as too low. Extremely low prices for goods, which led to low profits and layoffs of workers. This is why, guys, I know it's kind of like hard to see the connections between things, but this is why when countries do imperialism, they want those new markets for goods, right? Because ideally, Maytag now says, all right, I sold a washing machine to everyone in America. Why don't we try to sell these things overseas now so we can keep the prices high? We don't have to drop the prices, right? We want to continue to sell. We don't want this like backlog of washing machines in our warehouses. All right, so when you think of the Great Depression, right, normally people think of like the stock market crash as the cause, but the fact is problems in the American economy were kind of already spiraling, and then the stock market crash just made it a heck of a lot worse. So number 5 here says, how did the Federal Reserve react to massive investment in the stock market? Let's just take a step back for a second. Again, instead of making you read this, maybe we could just talk our way through it. Do you guys know what the concept of stock even is? Like, what does it mean if you buy stock? During COVID, right, everyone was buying, what was it, like GameStop stock, thinking they were going to make a killing, right? GameStop, right? GameStop and like AMC, movie theaters, I think was another one. Buying a share of a company, right? And when you buy a share of a company, you are a part owner in that company. And I'm gonna oversimplify, but generally speaking, let's say you bought enough stock of Apple to own 25% of all the available shares of Apple. That means 4 times per year, you receive 25% of Apple's profits. Again, I'm oversimplifying it, right? If you are a part owner in the company, you receive part of the profits of that corporation. And remember, not every business is a corporation that can sell shares of themselves. You have to seek special approval for that from the government. But the idea being, when you're a corporation, you sell shares, you get that money and you invest it in the business, right? Maybe you open up a factory, you hire workers, right? Apple takes this money, and apparently they're coming out with new stuff today. It's been all over the news, so I'm kind of curious to see what they come up with. All right, so stock is cool because it is a way for you potentially to make money. But how do you make money from the stock market? It's cool. One way is investing in the business and keeping your money there and receiving part of the profits. But what's another way you can make money potentially? It's literal gambling. Yeah, right? You buy stock at a low price and you hope that over time, if the business does well, other people invest in it as well, right? And usually if more people buy something, the price goes up, right? Because there's less of it out there. This is going to sound confusing, but the point is when more people invest in a business, the stock price goes up. And then if you're thinking, all right, it's probably going to go up as much as it can go up, I'm going to sell it while the price is high and I make a killing. So in the 1920s, right, America was doing great, right? We didn't get pummeled during World War I. Our businesses are going through the roaring 20s. So people were investing in all these different stocks thinking that there's going to be no end to how high these things can go. And people decide too, you know what? I don't have the money for the stock right now, so I'm going to buy it on credit. And when the stock goes up, I'll sell it when it's high. I'll pay back the people who loaned me money, and I'll also have extra for myself. That could be dangerous because if the stock doesn't go up, then you can't pay back the person you borrowed from and they start repossessing your home and your car. Not fun. Hence the Hooverville situation. All right, so the United States is looking at this situation and seeing how everyone is pouring their life savings into stock, knowing full well that stock prices cannot go up forever. Eventually it gets to a point where people lose confidence that it can continue. They start bailing out and selling, and the stock prices crash. So we tried to do something to slow the buying of stock. And it has to do with the Federal Reserve System. This is like the national banking system. And what they tried, and again, this is not an economics class, we don't have to know everything about these things, but what they did was they raised interest rates to slow the spending of money. You might have heard of interest rates before. Like what is an interest rate? Is it your rate of interest in learning this lesson right now? Yes, exactly, right? So it could work two ways, right? If it's a savings account, and you put money into a savings account, an interest rate is the percentage extra that they pay you as a thank you for having your money in that bank. Usually those interest rates are really, really low. The banks don't like to give you free money. Free money is cool though. If you have an opportunity to open up a savings account, I would do it as soon as you can because the longer your money sits in there, the more free money you get. But it also works with loans, right? If you buy a house or like a house loan, it's called a mortgage. If you buy a car, unless you've got super cash in your pocket, you're probably taking out an auto loan. So you borrow that money from a bank, and then you pay that money back over time for your car per month with an interest rate attached to it. So not only are you paying back the amount of money you borrowed, you're paying back a little bit extra per month. That's how the bank makes money off of you. So imagine that interest rate is really, really high. And I'll give you an example of a really high one. Credit card interest rates are crazy, right? They usually hover around 20%. So what does that translate to? Let's say you spent $100 with your credit card, okay, and you didn't pay it back in full in that month, and you decided, I don't have the money right now, I'll pay them back next month. Now it's $120 because it's a 20% interest rate attached to that, right? And if you do that month per month and you're not paying back in full, that could just add up really quickly over time. So imagine the credit card company raised your interest rate to 50%. Are you going to use that credit card as much anymore? Hell no. Okay, same thing with the cars and the houses. If they raise the interest rates in those things as well, you're probably not going to take out the loan for the car anymore because you can't afford to pay the loan back. Same thing with the houses. So that did work. People stopped buying stock with credit, but it also stopped people from buying houses and cars because they couldn't afford to take out the loans anymore. So Isabella, what do you think happened to a lot of those car companies? They stopped selling as many cars. If they're not selling as many cars, what happens to those car companies? Maybe, in theory. They're not going to make as much money. And then, Lindsay, what's going to happen to some of those workers at the Ford factory? They might get laid off. And you start to see this throughout the economy, more and more people losing their jobs, right? And that kind of shakes people's faith in the U.S. economy. So if I did have money invested in these businesses, and I know that these businesses aren't doing as well anymore, I might say, oh, I own stock in Ford. Ford just had layoffs because no one's buying Ford cars anymore. That's it. Sell the Ford stock. I'm out because I know they're not going to last much longer. And if everyone does that at the same time, stock prices crash, and all of a sudden people lose their life savings because they pumped all their money into the stock market. And maybe they borrowed money to buy that stock, and now they can't pay back the stockbroker. Okay, it was called Black Tuesday, October 29th, I think, in 1929. Not a good situation. Okay, so this raising of interest rates did not work out so well. And people are talking about that right now as well, because we have a situation in which we have high inflation, people are spending a lot of money in the economy, prices are out of control. So they're like, maybe if we raise interest rates, we could slow the spending, and then the prices will come back down and everyone will be happy, which could be true, but maybe then the businesses don't do as well. It's always a catch-22. It's hard to know exactly what the right thing to do is at any given moment when it comes to finances. And it's very confusing, and smarter people than me know how to do these things. So let's infer. We have a Great Depression in America because of overproduction and the crashing of the stock market. How do you think that might affect Germany? Any ideas? Americans lose their jobs. 1 out of every 4, jobless. And if they have a job, it's not a high-paying job. Most people, of course, some people still did well during the Great Depression. Big things came out during the Great Depression. The Wizard of Oz, one of the biggest movies of all time, developed and released during the Great Depression, right? So it wasn't all sad, right? There were some yellow brick roads around, all right? But let's imagine for a second that we're all interconnected. Aren't there German cars? Does anyone own a German car? Okay, so RJ, right? So you're an American person, you lost your job, you like American cars, Volkswagen, Audi, whatever, Benz, whatever it is. Are you buying that Volkswagen now? Probably not. Right? So the Germans are seeing less sales in America. The German businesses now suffer as well. Compounded with the Germans were desperate after World War I, right? Because they owe money to the British and the French. So what the Germans did was they borrowed money from the United States to pay their reparations, figuring, okay, we're going to borrow money from America to pay the British and the French. Once we get ourselves rebuilt, we'll have enough money to pay back everybody. That was a big bet, though. So let's summarize that, okay? How did the Great Depression affect Germany? The US stopped loaning money to Germany, and then they could no longer pay their reparations, right? As well as the fact, like we said before, right? The German businesses in America weren't doing so well anymore, right? So they're suffering as well. So what the US did to try to help out its own businesses, right? Like, let's say you're Ford, right? You're in a situation in which you're losing out on sales. Well, the Ford company would rather all Americans buy Ford cars, right? They don't want RJ around, right? They don't want someone buying a Mercedes-Benz or a Volkswagen. So sometimes what we do, and there's positives and negatives associated with this, sometimes what we do is we put in a certain kind of tax that makes the foreign businesses' products more expensive. We talked about this recently. What kind of tax is that called? Taylor? A tariff. Okay, so the US, this is what we did, put tariffs on foreign-made products. This is what we did to try to save US businesses, where we're kind of trying to guarantee that American people just buy American products. Okay, the problem is that has a lot of other negative consequences, right? So in the scenario we just talked about, right, we just rose the prices of Volkswagen cars, okay? Volkswagen is seeing this, right? They're seeing that, oh, Volkswagens are really expensive in America. The dealers are having to jack up their prices to pay their taxes, and they're not selling anymore. So Germany now decides to stop selling Volkswagen cars in America. Why is that maybe bad for the American consumer if the other car companies aren't selling their products in America anymore? You're the American consumer. How is that maybe bad for you, Sean? Monopolies can form, right? Now there's less choice. Right? And now Ford or Chevy, whoever, they don't have to worry about competition. So they can maybe raise their prices as well, or maybe make the quality of the car less. This also negatively affects Germany as well. Because what Germany's going to do is that they're going to say, well, fine, we want German people buying German-made things. So we'll jack up the price of the American cars coming to Germany. Now the American car companies suffer in that regard. And if this sounds extremely confusing, that's because it is, right? This is called trade war. We're doing all these things to try to limit the competition of other countries' products in America to try to make American people buy American things, but it has all these side effects. Ultimately, what happens is trade between countries stops. And when you have that situation, there's going to be less sales, less employment, nothing gets fixed. Okay, the tariffs we've seen time and time again are not a good solution to solving trade problems. All right? So I'm just going to add that here to kind of clarify. This hurt German businesses because they could no longer sell to Americans. Okay? So again, we're trying to figure out how our problems ultimately affected the rest of the world, right? Germany and Italy so much that they, it led to the rise of the fascists and World War II, right? Things got really bad in those countries. But in the US, right, a country that's used to being democratic, and despite the problems that we have in Congress, right, oftentimes Republicans and Democrats can come to a consensus on certain things, right? When it came to punishing Vladimir Putin, right, both Democrats and Republicans alike, were like, we got to pass economic punishments on Russia, right? We come to a consensus on certain matters. Countries that became newly democratic weren't used to doing that. And they would have problems getting laws passed to try to fix their economies. So people lost faith in the government's ability to do that. In America, we did things a little bit differently. Does anybody know who that guy is? Yeah, FDR. Okay, there were two Roosevelts as president, both from New York, right? We had Teddy Roosevelt, and you get his cousin Franklin in the 1930s, the only president to serve more than 2 terms in office. Okay, does anyone remember what FDR did to try to help America through the Depression? Controversial to this day, but at least maybe it helped a little bit. The New Deal. Nice, Sabrina. Yeah, did we mention that yesterday? I think we did, right? So do you guys remember? So let's put that in for number 8. We're going to put FDR passed the New Deal. Controversial in a lot of ways because it's going to expand the power of the government and government spending. And ever since that time period, the government has just run up what we call national debt. So it is controversial, but there is a positive side effect. What was the whole point behind the New Deal? Do you guys remember from 8th grade? Okay, so laws to help the economy, such as, let's say, authorizing new building projects like roads and bridges. Right, so the theory is, okay, Americans are out of work. The businesses are not there to hire them because they went out of business. So maybe the government can hire these people, right? They ask themselves, all right, what does the country need in order to get trade going at a better rate? Oh, better roads, bridges. In the modern world, it would be something like, I don't know, electric car refueling stations, if you will, in the country, or high-speed internet all throughout the country, even in like the vast farm, rural regions of the country. That would be a modern version of this. So we're gonna hire Americans who are unemployed, and they're gonna pave roads and build bridges, and we're gonna pay them a salary to do that. When they're done, we'll have a bridge that we can all use, right? That'll facilitate trade and travel. And those people are gonna go back home and spend that money. They will go to the movie theater and see the Wizard of Oz. They will go to the donut shop and eat a donut. I don't know why I thought of that right away, but you see what I'm saying, right? They're gonna go home and spend that money, and if people spend money, the businesses will stay in business, right? They might buy the Ford car now, because now they're making a salary. Where the money comes from to pay those workers is the controversial part, right? Where does the government get this cash? Usually they borrow it, but we'll worry about that another time. The point is, in America, we were able to come up with some kind of a solution to get people through. It was not a perfect solution by any means. I wouldn't go so far as to say that it got America out of the Great Depression, but it eased the burden of the Depression. The Germans, as we'll see, could not figure out a good solution to fix this. They couldn't come to a consensus in their government about what the best policy would be. As a result, nothing got accomplished. And then Hitler says, I got the solution. Oh, the democracy is not working. You couldn't fix the problem. Get rid of it. The Treaty of Versailles is a burden. Get rid of it. Oh, the British and the French, they're causing you problems. I don't know. Go to war with them. All right, very simple solutions to these really complicated problems. So we'll get more into that obviously tomorrow. So this idea of the government spending money to kind of fix the economy, really it starts with FDR, and it's something we do right now. Right, so what I did here is I put a link to an article, and if you clicked on that, it looks like this. And it talks about what we did during COVID to try to help the US economy, right? Because during COVID, all the shutdowns, businesses went out of business. I'm sure there's something that was relevant to you in your life, a business or something that went out of business during COVID. My favorite Chinese takeout restaurant went out of business during COVID. I will never get over that. Not cool, right? A lot of small businesses did go under. Right, so the government is sitting here thinking, oh man, if these people are unemployed, they're spending less money, then other businesses will suffer as well, and then maybe they go out of business. So we have to do something to keep people spending money, right? Maybe if there were more people going to that takeout restaurant, maybe it could have stayed in business, right?